Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Corner Office. Special edition here. Jack and I obviously back in the studio, and we have a special guest with us today. Jack, if you want to introduce him, please be my guest.
This is my roommate, Ryan Jainchill. Welcome on the show. It's long overdue.
I appreciate it, boys. I'm really happy to be on, and Jack talks about this show a lot, and I'm super excited to give my takes on stuff and hear how you guys do it.
You may remember Ryan from like our Week 10 NFL episode. You could see him kind of like busting through my door in the middle of the episode looking for toilet paper. So that's Ryan's claim to fame with Corner Office.
Full circle moment. Ryan, we're happy to have you on. This is going to be a really fun episode. And I think an obvious place to start this thing off is just, last week we had a lot of fun talking about some of our ins and outs of 2024 and 2025. And one of the ones that Jack brought up, just for the hell of it, was wearing college jerseys or wearing jerseys to college classes. Something that no one should be doing, aside from the fact that it's, rampant right now. But in the spirit of that, we all decided that we would have a secret jersey reveal here, and every one of us is going to pull out something from our closet right now, either new or old, to show off to the camera here. So who wants to go first? Am I going first?
Ryan, why don't you kick us off?
All right, I like it.
All right, I gotta grab it from right behind me up here. I just brought this one from home. I got a Arizona Coyotes reverse retro.
Oh my goodness!
Situate, Massachusetts native Connor Garland on the back.
Yeah,
he got traded exactly like 3 months after I bought this jersey. Super sweet. They only wore this for about half a season.
And Janie, just again, tell me how much you paid for that and where you got it.
So it's a website that doesn't exist anymore called Artfire. I think it was anywhere from $45 to $50, and
no way.
It's pretty authentic, pretty soft, and
it's just like DHgate.
It's got the ventilation up on the shoulders. It's got the fighting strap on the inside, and it's got the nice little desert design that the Desert Dogs used to do. And Connor Garland's my favorite current player in the NHL. Just love the way he plays, and when I saw this jersey released, I was like, shoot, I gotta buy it, and I'm not spending $200 on a real jersey. So Artfire it was.
I like that a lot. Yeah.
All right,
budget
Al,
menu item.
Al, you want to go next?
I mean, I have some teammates from Situate, so shout out Situate, cool spot, but the one that I am currently wearing right now underneath this is, I just got this Nigerian national team kit from 1990. This is the Okocha jersey. So I'm supporting the colors here, and I think this thing is sick. So I'm super excited that this came in.
If you watch soccer at all, you know that Nigeria always competes in AFCON. They are always very good, African Cup of Nations.
And B, their stuff is
their
always
jerseys
fire.
are always so cold,
especially when they have Adidas.
Cold.
Their Adidas jerseys are fire. So
with the throwback colors,
stoked
nice
to get
too.
this. Thank you.
All right, my jersey that I brought is, I have a Toon Squad Bugs Bunny jersey that I'm about to throw on, but my brother does like art and whatnot, and he custom painted Bugs Bunny on the jersey.
Yeah.
So Gavin
Shout
painted
out
that on
Gav.
there. Shout out Gavin. I'm gonna actually chuck this on. Jamie, chuck yours on too, pal.
Shout out Gavin. So yeah, that's a little fun thing here. We got maybe this jersey thing will become something that we do whenever we have somebody on the show for the first time. But now we are back to our regularly scheduled programming, and that involves us talking about, first and foremost, a game that is happening on Monday. Jack and I don't really cover college football as much as we probably should sometimes. It's really entertaining. I mean, I've watched a lot of Saturday games this year.
I think that there's a reason for that. We grew up in New England, and in New England, I mean, both of you guys can back me here. We don't grow up watching college football because there aren't really college football teams. Like, it's just not really what you do.
What's the best team to support? UMaine or like
BC?
The Minutemen of UMass, who are like 0-10 this year.
It's just not really a thing. So I didn't grow up watching college football. You had to go out of your way to find it, and a lot of our listeners kind of grew up the same way. So we don't really cover it, but we do watch it, and we're both very excited for this game.
Agreed. So, I mean, obviously you have the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame matching up with the Buckeyes of Ohio State here in a highly contested matchup. I think this is the first time that you can really point in the college football playoff and say, this is a parity matchup, in my opinion. I don't really think that these two are necessarily the best two teams in college football right now. But with the 12-team playoffs, something that I was a huge fan of after you got out of those momentary rounds where there was a bunch of really bad teams beating up on really good teams beating up on really bad teams. And once you got out of that round and you got into, the semifinal and the quarterfinal where we had a bunch of really close games, I don't think there has been, a Rose Bowl that hasn't been absolute fire.
This year's Rose Bowl was atrocious.
Yeah.
Which one was that?
Ohio State beat up on Oregon.
Oh, not that one. What was the one where Ohio State played
last year,
Texas?
Alabama played Michigan at the Rose Bowl, and that was a great game.
Okay, I'm mixing up my stuff, but either way, the semifinals are always kind of electric, and then sometimes the final can be a little bit underwhelming. I think it was 2 years ago that we saw TCU get absolutely dog-walked by Georgia. But I think that as a neutral fan, you're just kind of hoping for a good game here between Notre Dame and Ohio State. And we're going to get to our picks in a little bit, but I mean, Jack and I have kind of been rooting for the Irish this whole time. Jack, you want to just, give me a shout as to why that is?
Maybe has something to do with the fact that Marcus Freeman's one of the most likable guys on the planet.
Probably.
I mean, he is a third-year coach now, I believe, and he's Notre Dame spent a couple of years kind of in this funk almost where you expect them to be one of the best teams in college football. Right. The last couple of years they've come out and they've been, frankly, underwhelming, especially at the end of the Brian Kelly regime. They were done with him. They were ready for a new era. And I think that they found their guy who's ready to stick around for a while. And I don't know if you two necessarily feel the same way, but I don't think this college football playoff could have gone any better. I mean, these are two teams that would not have made the playoff. And every step of the way, we've had entertaining games. We've had more football, which is always good. Correct. And we're seeing new teams in the playoffs. I mean, teams like Arizona State and Boise State both made the top four, and even an SMU. But those are teams that probably wouldn't have made it if it was a 4-team playoff.
Yeah, probably wouldn't have even been considered, I would say.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I think that it's growing the game for people like us who didn't grow up watching it. Now we want to watch it. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's doing its job sufficiently. So I'm a huge fan of that. But yeah, I think that we're pulling for the Irish in this game. I think the entire country's pulling for the Irish in this game, mainly because Ohio State is so hateable. Generally, they are so hateable.
Yeah. I think that Ohio State, just in general, they are the favorites here. I think they beat the Oregon team, which I predicted. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say it. I knew that they were going to beat Oregon when they played Oregon for a second time. I'm just saying. I just want it out there. Our predictions aren't always awful. But yeah, I mean, I think the only knock that you can have on a Notre Dame team is that they're not playing in a conference, which I think is a little bit weird at this point in the 21st century. I think that all teams should probably be playing in a conference. For Notre Dame, probably the ACC. But that being said, I think we are pulling for the Irish. If you're in our corner, Cheney, you got any thoughts on this one?
I'm gonna ask you this question, Janie. Notre Dame for basketball, and I think basically every other sport is in the ACC.
Yep.
But when it comes to football, I think that all three of us would agree that we would like to see them involved in conference play so that we see them year round, right?
Absolutely. I think
but would you rather see them would you rather see them in a conference like the ACC, or would you rather see them in a Midwest conference like the Big 12 or the Big 10?
Look, so in all their other sports, I'm pretty certain they're in the ACC, except for hockey. They're in the Big 10 for hockey, and they're playing Michigan and Minnesota, Michigan State, some of the top teams in the country nightly. And, those are always good matchups, and geographically it makes sense that they'd be in the Big 10. And with how the ACC dynamic is of them trying to expand west with the SMU, Cal, and Stanford, it's the Atlantic coast part is kind of losing its integrity, in my opinion. So I could see it happening, but one of my childhood best friends is a diehard Notre Dame fan, and he has always been against conferences, and just for specifically for football, that is. And as much as it would be cool to see them yearly play Ohio State and Michigan and all these guys, or even if they were in the ACC, they're taking on Clemson all the time. They're playing a pretty ACC heavy schedule anyway. And I think, as Alex was saying, that this is probably the best matchup in terms of parity that it could have been. It's the 7 versus the 8. It's two teams that wouldn't have been in otherwise. It's a 14-1 team versus a 13-2 team. I think this is going to be a fantastic matchup. And like you guys, I'm for the Irish here.
Okay, so all three of us are pulling for the Irish right now. Now let's get into our official pick, though. Just because you're supporting a team doesn't mean that you necessarily think they're going to win. Let's go across the board here. Jack, who do you have, Notre Dame versus Ohio State?
Well, I think that the question, and we're going to talk about X factors when it comes to the NFL playoffs. I think in this game, if we're going to do X factor here, I think it's got to be Riley Leonard. In his last couple of games, he's been somewhat inconsistent throwing the football. I believe he had 2 interceptions in the last game. Yep. And he hasn't looked particularly confident. And he got rocked in the last game. He went out with a concussion. Like, he went into the tent on concussion protocol in the last game. So, I mean, I think that if Notre Dame is to win this game, which, again, they are the underdogs, it's going to come down to his quarterback play. And as much as I'm a Will Howard hater, he has done a very good job distributing the football throughout the playoffs so far.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think the quarterback battle is what we're going to be watching in this game. And I think if Riley Leonard plays well, that the Notre Dame defense is going to give Ohio State a tough time. They're one of the best in the country. But if he doesn't, then I think that we could see Ohio State kind of walk all over them and score like 30-plus points. And so I am going to say that I think Ohio State will win this game, but I do want Notre Dame to win.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. I think Ohio State wins. I think they have a more powerful lineup top to bottom, and I just trust their star power a little bit more. Jeremiah Smith has been fantastic for them as a freshman this year. I do think that there is going to be a defensive score in this game, whether that's for Notre Dame or for Ohio State. I think that that's not really a far shout. Both of these defenses have probably been the thing that has like set these two teams apart this year. But for me, the X factor this year, I think it comes down to the coaching. You know what I mean? Ryan Day is a guy who has been berated for choking in big games, and thus far he's executed a game plan very well, and has gotten them, into a position to be successful. Even though he's been like, a lot of people have been like, you've had 2 national championship rosters kind of just handed to you by Urban Meyer and you've failed to win a natty. So I think it comes down to the fact of, who is going to show up when it comes to coaching? Will it be Marcus Freeman, who has clearly proven that he can swing above his weight and beat some of the best teams in college football? Or is it going to be Ryan Day, kind of a guy who's been a perennial loser when it comes to, these big game situations?
Well, and I also think that entering this college football playoff, he really was playing for his job. I mean, their last game that they played before the playoff was when they lost to Michigan, I believe.
Correct.
And he came into the playoff on the hot seat, in my opinion. And I think that was kind of like generally agreed upon. And I think that he has played his way into a continuation in this franchise.
Yep.
And
so I agree with you. What do you think, Jane?
Like, I agree with what you guys are saying, that I think it could be close, but I think Ohio State's still going to take this one. But obviously, as I'm rooting for Notre Dame in this game, I'm looking for Notre Dame's offensive line to contain Jack Sawyer and that pass rush that victimized Quinn Ewers last week whenever they played in the semifinals, and how Riley Leonard and Jeremiah Love can successfully pound the rock and wear down that pass rush. And I think if they can successfully do that, I think Notre Dame can come out on top. And I agree. I think there will be a defensive score in this game, and it's probably going to be a strip sack again, like what happened to Texas. And but I do agree that if the run game is off for Notre Dame, I think Ohio State could run away with this one.
Well, and Jeremiah Love is banged up right now.
A little bit.
He's not. I think he's playing at like 60% max. So they're really relying on their backup running back. I mean, just like, but again, Michigan was in a similar position last year into the final, and on the first drive of the national final, Donovan Edwards went for like an 85-yard score. So
right, I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen, but I also feel like this is a game that Notre Dame could win by putting up 14 points, and just riding on their defense. But they're going to have to do that. You know what I mean? I think Riley Leonard has proven to be a worse quarterback than Quinn Ewers when it comes to timing, when it comes to accuracy, like all these types of things. And Quinn Ewers had really big problems against this Ohio State defense. which is really the anchor of their entire team. Because I also don't think their offense is super explosive. This is two teams who have really good defenses, and it's going to be who can capitalize on the turnover battle, on the margin, all these types of things, who can get quarterback pressures, and who can put their team in a position to be successful.
Right. The difference is between the two offenses. I agree. Both teams have a good defense. Ohio State can hit you with a big play. They can throw the ball downfield. They'll pick up yards in chunks, whereas Notre Dame plays a very slow, methodical 12-13 play offense.
Right.
So if it's an offensive shootout, the clock is not going to be on Notre Dame's side. And that's something to look out for in this game.
I agree. All right, let's move on to the NFL if we shall here. We got, a big divisional matchup all across the board here. Are there any games from this weekend that you really want to touch on? The only one that didn't go to plan was Vikings versus Rams. I feel like the rest of them were decently chalk across the board here. So obviously you have Texans versus Chiefs, Rams versus Eagles, Commanders versus Lions, and Ravens versus Bills. We're going to touch on all of these. And Jack had a genius idea for these types of games, and I just want you to preview what we're going to be doing for each of our picks here. And we'll talk about who we think are going to win these games and go to the AFC and NFC championships.
Well, yeah, so I think that before we head into our NFL picks, I think that we should just touch on that Vikings-Rams game. And besides the Vikings-Rams game, I didn't think there was a single good game from this weekend. It was all very boring, pretty bad football. I mean, if we're gonna call it like it was pretty bad football this weekend. That Texans-Chargers game was just atrocious all around.
Yep.
But Monday night, the Vikings and Rams, obviously both teams are thrown off, especially the Rams. They're supposed to be playing a home game. Instead, due to the fires, which is horrible out in the Pacific Palisades, they're playing in Glendale, Arizona, with a somewhat home crowd. But I mean, even the Vikings fans did show out in Glendale. So that's already adversity going into that game for the Los Angeles Rams. And then they came out and just dominated. And so I think the question that you have to ask is, Sam Darnold led their team to a 14-2 record. And they're only 14-3. Two of those three losses being against the Lions, one in Week 18.
Yep.
And so he played horribly in Week 18 and came out and played horribly in the wild card round. And he's a guy that you were looking at before those two games as the potential Minnesota Vikings franchise quarterback. I mean, he had played himself into a starting quarterback contract.
Yep.
And now I think you look at these last two games and it becomes a serious question as to, is he worth backing up the truck, or should they go in another direction? So the question I want to pose to you two is, did Sam Darnold play himself out of a starting contract in these final 2 weeks?
Janie,
Ryan,
go
take
ahead.
the floor.
Yeah. I don't think he played himself out of a starting contract. I definitely think he paid himself out of a 4+ year with a lot of money guaranteed deal. I think, coming into, if you would have asked me, I attended the Packers Vikings game in Week 17. I was out in Minnesota, and just watching him so composed, hits all of his targets, wasn't dealing with a lot of pressure. I would have thought he would have gotten the Brinks truck, and now I can see him. I could see a situation where Minnesota brings him back if he's willing to take a little bit less money to kind of mentor McCarthy now that he'd be healthy. But I could also see a team like the Giants or maybe Vegas that if they pick a quarterback in this draft, which those teams are likely going to, and if they want to bring in a guy like Darnold and have him mentor someone, that would be a possibility. But I don't think he earned himself out of a starter's contract. I think he earned himself out of a lot of guaranteed money with these last 2 weeks of play.
Okay. I think this question really boils down to what the Vikings think they have with JJ McCarthy, which I think no one knows. You know what I mean? It sounds like they think that he was the guy going into this season based off of like one preseason game that he played. No one has seen him play football in the National Football League. No one knows what he's going to look like. And issue number 2 is, I don't really think it matters, like, if Sam Darnold is the quarterback of the future. I don't think they're going to pay him. I just don't. I think that, the past 2 weeks, you lose the division by losing to the Lions in pretty bad fashion. And then you get blown out by the Rams, a team that doesn't have a really good defense. The issue with Darnold in this game was he was just holding the ball too long. He wasn't throwing. He wasn't hitting his read options. He wasn't just tucking and running for 5 or 6 yards. So like those types of reads, I don't think that's a thing that like can be developed. You know what I mean? Like that's like sitting in the pocket for too long is a really big issue. And it's really disappointing to me that we have to have a conversation about a guy who just brought your team to a 14-3 record, something that no one in the preseason expected. And he's not going to get paid. You know what I mean? In the NFC, though, there is a tendency to overpay like mediocre to bad quarterbacks, I think. Dak Prescott comes right to mind when you think of that as a guy who probably is making too much money.
I think that even the Jordan Love contract comes to mind.
Sure. I mean, look, if you look at the AFC, you have, I think, the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL are in the AFC. Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. 4 best quarterbacks, and then you could maybe make an argument for, Jalen Hurts at the 5 or Jared Goff at the 5 or someone like that, Jordan Love at the 5, Baker, right? All these types of guys. But none of those guys are like upper echelon QBs. They're not MVP candidates, and they're still making the same starter money that a lot of these, MVP guys are making. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw him get a contract that's, 25, 30 million, but it's not going to be the 8-figure deal like the 50 million that I think people were expecting him to get if they won a playoff game. And I don't know if he's really worth that, but at the same time, like, it's kind of disappointing if you're him for, the amount of work this season has, produced, just to kind of lose that at the end here. In my opinion, I think he has.
I think for me, this conversation opens up the can of worms that we've talked about many times on the show, which is, can a system quarterback
can a game manager win a Super Bowl?
Can a game manager win a Super Bowl? I think he falls into that category of guys like Jared Goff, like Brock Purdy, who are good enough at making simple throws, but aren't necessarily going to win you a game. And I think that the Minnesota Vikings need to have a serious conversation about whether they're in a win now scenario. And I think that if they are, then they have no choice but to pay him, because you can't afford to throw in the towel for the next 2 or 3 years with a rookie quarterback. But I think that if they decide that this team is not quite good enough to win a Super Bowl, which I would not disagree with, then I think that you could see them going in a different direction.
Yeah, well, I mean, like let's look at quarterback free agency this year, right? And see if you like any of these options. I'm just going to fire some off to the two of you. Do you like any of these options more than you like Sam Darnold? Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Justin Fields.
I think there's a real conversation there.
Janie?
No, I still I like Darnold more.
Russell Wilson.
Absolutely not.
No.
Okay. Winston.
No.
Danny Dimes.
No.
Don't even ask.
Okay. Flacco.
Nope.
Yes.
You like Flacco more than Dobbs?
I love Joe.
I
probably not.
Like
Probably
Flacco.
not. But I love Flacco.
And the only other name here that I think you would even consider that isn't just a perennial backup, I mean, Cooper Rush.
Well, he is a perennial backup. I
know, but I think he's played decently well.
I think that there's 2 options here, right? I think he either re-signs with the Vikings, and that gets done early.
Yep.
Or I think that there are 3 teams who have the top 3 picks right now, all of whom are looking for a quarterback, one of whom will not get a quarterback and will have to wait until next season. Okay. Most likely, who has the 3 pick? Is it the Raiders?
The Giants.
Most likely the Giants. And I think that if Darnold does not get the deal, which is very possible, then I think that the Giants need to sit down and have a legitimate conversation with him to come in and be their starter for 1 to 2 possibly years, so that they can reset that timer, be horrible for another year, and then be in that spot to get a quarterback out of next year's draft class. Which I don't think would be Sam Darnold's ideal role, but I think that is one of the 2 options.
Okay. I think if you're Darnold, you want to re-sign in Minnesota.
Obviously you do.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think that system is something that worked for you, and I don't necessarily know if going back to New York is going to be super successful for him.
Correct.
we've seen one season wonders before. I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of them. And I think that committing big money to a guy who only had one season and was really, really like struggled against teams above 500 this year, we've seen this happen before. The Daniel Jones situation comes to my mind here.
Case Keenum on the Vikings comes to my mind.
Sure.
Yep.
It's almost the exact same situation.
So I don't know if you really want to commit to this because it's, it could be scary if this is the guy that, but then at the same time, if you let him walk and he's successful, he's another Pro Bowl type of season, then you're kicking yourself, So I think the Vikings are kind of in an impossible situation right now where it's like, if you do pay him and it doesn't work out, your front office is in a hot water. And if you don't pay him and he goes someplace else and it works out, your front office is in hot water.
I think the
kind
ideal,
of a tough situation.
I think the ideal situation is you get him to come back on a 1 to 2 year deal where you may pay a ton of money for him to come back for 2 years, but he's not there for 5. You know what I mean? And then he can continue to coach up McCarthy, who, let's be honest, is not NFL ready at all right now, especially he wasn't last year and he's not now having had a year off. So we will unpack that as more details come out. But for now, let's shift gears towards the NFL divisional rounds. Okay. We got 4 games this weekend. Let's walk through them, and I want each of us to give who we think is the X factor for each game. So starting with the Chiefs versus the Texans. This is a game that I feel like happens every year in the wild card round or in I just feel like I watch the Chiefs play the Texans every single year. And they definitely played a couple of years ago when the Texans went up like 21-0 and then came all the way
2019, 24-0 lead they blew.
There you go.
Yeah, so, Janie, I'm going to kick it to you. Who do you think wins this game, and who do you think is the X factor?
I think it's Kansas City. I think that team, as much as, I scoff at them at this point, 3-time Super Bowl champions, they might be on their way to a 4th. I don't think so, but I think they win this game, and it'll be close. It certainly will be close. That's how Kansas City's won a lot of games this year. And I think Chris Jones is the X factor in anyone on that defensive line because Houston's offensive line has been rough this year. Laramie Tunsil, Titus Howard, I can't name anyone else on that line, but they've struggled a lot, and Stroud's been scrambling a lot, taking sacks, and especially with a shorthanded receiver core, I think I'm looking for the Chiefs' defensive line to make a big impact in this game. And when, a guy like Chris Jones is in your face constantly, like it's not a recipe for success for CJ Stroud and the Texans.
Yeah, Laramie Tunsil, who normally has been an absolute rock on the offensive line, a guy who, has been consistent for a number of years, gets paid a lot of money to do it, leads the NFL in penalties this year.
Yeah.
Which is something that I think you see the Chiefs get a lot of calls for. And I think you're going to continue to see that there will probably be a holding call on him, this weekend. I also think the Chiefs win. I feel like the Texans have taken a massive step back this year despite winning a playoff game, something that they didn't do that last year, right? They didn't win a playoff game.
They did.
Okay.
They beat the Cleveland Browns.
They're at the same spot that they were last year.
But they were ahead of schedule at this time last year.
I agree, and I just don't think that they've been super consistent. Obviously, you see them play a Los Angeles Chargers team that I think was kind of on fraud watch. They didn't beat a ton of really good teams this year in Jim Harbaugh's first season. I'm not nervous about that. I think they'll be fine. But I think the Chiefs are just way too experienced to lose this game, and I do think you'll see them back in the AFC Championship game. I think the Chiefs' X factor actually comes on offense. I think it's going to be Kelsey. I think that the reason for that is just because the Chiefs have really struggled to put up points on the board this entire season thus far. And although they have a 15-2 record going into this week. They've been playing games in the 20s, and those are types of games that I think in the playoffs, when it comes down to that, the Texans have a chance to win. Obviously, they put up 27 points on the Texans on December 21st. And their offense has been clicking a little bit more. But really the X factor for the Chiefs all season has been, if you can get Travis Kelce involved in the offense, their team has been successful and they put up more points than when they don't. So I think that you're going to expect to see him get a lot of targets come Sunday. And, I think that the Chiefs will probably win this game by 1 or 2 scores.
So for me, I kind of took a different angle from this than you guys did. I think the Chiefs will win, but I think that if the Texans are going to win, their X factor is going to be their defense and most particularly Will Anderson. I think that the best shot that this Texans team has to win is to play very good defense against this Chiefs team, which we've seen teams do throughout the season.
Yep.
And the key to their defense is getting home. And if they can put pressure on Mahomes, I think that he's known for extending the play.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's their best chance at holding this Chiefs team to not a lot of points. And if the Texans are going to win this game, it's going to be an ugly one, like a 17-14 or something like that.
Yeah, it's not going to be a shootout.
But obviously, this Texans team is horribly beat up. And I think that's part of the reason that they're a little bit obviously they exceeded expectations so far last year. I think that they're right around where people thought they would be in year 2. So I think that even winning a playoff game this year is a success. But again, I think a fully healthy Texans team has a much better chance than they do right now, obviously. But if they're going to win, it's going to be due to their defense. But I do have the Chiefs. Moving into the next game. This is one that Ryan and I are both very excited for, as I'm sure you are too, Alex. It's kind of every NFL fan's second teams going up against each other.
Yeah.
The Commanders versus the Lions. Both feel good stories. I feel like people are generally okay with either one of these teams winning. So, Alex, I'm going to kick it to you for this one. Who do you got here?
I think the X factor in Commanders Chiefs, and it is kind of chalk, is going to be Jared Goff. I think that this team plays really well when they're clicking offensively. Their defense is going to be something that is going to be lagging behind for the entirety of these playoffs. They're going to have to win games where teams are putting up like 30, 25 points on them. You know what I mean? So I think that their offense with Goff and Gibbs would probably be my two. Is going to be the X factor here. And, can Jared Goff, a conversation we've had endless times on this show, can Jared Goff lead your team to a Super Bowl, is going to be on full effect during this game. I think this is going to be a quarterback battle. It's going to be between Jaden Daniels, a rising star, and Jared Goff, somebody who has established himself as a starter, somebody who could probably be getting paid pretty good money in the league. But I do think that Goff is the X factor for this team, despite the fact that they have so many defensive woes.
Jen?
I want to add on to what Alex said. Jack and I are pretty high on the Commanders, and we have been since we got to DC last year.
That's actually how we met. We met at a Commanders game.
We did meet at a Commanders game. That's pretty special, and we've been watching games here in our apartment all season. And as much as I like that team, and boy, would I love to see them succeed, I think Detroit comes out on top in this one. And kind of adding on to what you said, Alex, the return of David Montgomery is going to be huge.
Yep.
And he's off the injury report as of today, as what Schefter said. And I think having that two-headed monster, Sonic and Knuckles, back for Detroit, Gibbs and Montgomery, just adds that other wrinkle that I think they can exploit against Washington. And I could see big games out of both Gibbs and Montgomery. And if Montgomery's feeling 100% and he's ready to go, I think he's going to have a big game.
I think that this Commanders team, if they have guys on their interior defensive line like Jonathan Allen back, obviously a veteran Bobby Wagner's kind of waning, but he's still one of the best tacklers in the league. Yeah. I think that they are actually better suited to, no team in the NFL is ready to defend this Lions backfield. I'm not saying that at all, but I think that they are primed to do better than most teams do against this backfield that Detroit obviously is the best in the league in. Mm-hmm. For me, I think that the X factor in this game is the wide receiver core for the Washington Commanders. They're kind of a toss-up from a week-to-week basis. Obviously, guys like Noah Brown going out early in the season made people like De'Ami Brown step up, which he did last week, having 5 for 80 and a touchdown.
Yep.
So I think that if you can rely on guys like De'Ami Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, and my X factor for this game, Terry McLaurin, in games where he gets 10-plus targets for X amount of yards and a touchdown, which he has done in like 12 different games this season, the Commanders are playing at their best. But if they can't get him the ball, then their offense is very stagnant. So I think that Terry McLaurin is the X factor if the Commanders are going to win this football game.
Okay.
Let's move into the Sunday games. The first game is Rams-Eagles. I'm going to kick this one off. I think that this one kind of jumps off the page at you when you're talking about X factors. Obviously, the Rams are coming off a dominant performance on Monday. Yep. And they're playing an Eagles team that has been winning games, but still, I feel like we aren't really that confident in. I mean, they didn't score a point against that Packers team in the second and third quarters, and they were getting booed at Lincoln Financial, which is, I mean, utterly ridiculous. Yep. But I think that the X factor in this game has to be Jalen Hurts. Obviously, he's coming off a concussion. He hadn't played for 3 weeks before, and he came out last week and was fine. I don't think that he was great, and he does not look like a quarterback who's ready to lead his team to the Super Bowl. And I think that this week he could prove a lot of people, including myself, wrong there by playing a good game. And they're going to need it in order to beat this Rams defense, who did very well last week. So for me, the X factor in this game is Jalen Hurts. I do think the Eagles win, and I do think he plays well.
All right. I'm going to do what you just did for the past few picks, and I'm going to take the team that I don't expect to win this game. I do think the Eagles win here, but I think the X factor for the Rams is Cooper Kupp, a guy who has been targeted 0 times in the game against the Vikings for 0 receptions and 0 yards, and has done that like 2 or 3 times this season. They just have to find a way to get him involved in the offense, in my opinion. I mean, he's one of the best route runners in the league. You have the two-headed monster of him and Puka Nacua if you're going to be throwing the football, and then you can switch that up with the dynamic run game of Kyron Williams. You have to find a way to get your best receivers involved, especially when you have Matt Stafford at quarterback. And because of that, I think that the only way that this Rams team can win this game is if they get their receivers involved in downfield and making plays, because I do think that they're going to have to outscore Saquon Barkley, who has really been the only consistent member of this Eagles roster for the entire season here. So for me, I think the X factor on the Rams side is probably Cooper Kupp.
So I had 2 things written down. I had Jalen Hurts, which Jack already talked about, and I'm kind of glad you did, because I want to highlight the Eagles secondary as my X factor. Reed Blankenship, Quinyon Mitchell. Those are the 2 guys I'm highlighting, because if Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean and Darius Slay Jr., I meant that group, not even just Reed Blankenship, if they can limit Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, I think Philly's going to kind of run away with it.
Well, Tyler Higbee played very well last week.
I know. And you, with the thing you mentioned with Kupp getting no targets again, I think they're going to be looking for him. And if that secondary with Mitchell, DeJean, and Slay, if they can blanket these guys and limit how many yards they get after the catch, I think that's going to play a huge factor in this game, because the Eagles' defense is fantastic. That's been their MO all season, as much as their offense has struggled. And obviously, I think Hurts is probably the real X factor, as Jack mentioned. But I'm looking for that secondary group to limit the yards after catch for Nacua, Kupp, and Higbee.
And obviously, the Eagles this week are without Nakobe Dean, who is him and Zach Bond are kind of their primary coverage linebackers, which means that Tyler Higbee could be primed for a huge game. Yeah. But I think that another person that we could have mentioned in this conversation is Kyron Williams, who started off the season very well, and in the last kind of 7 weeks has been very mediocre.
I agree.
And brings another element to their offense that could be very dangerous, but hasn't been in past weeks.
Yeah, but I like Janie's highlighting the Eagles secondary, because there are so many weapons on that team. That Rams team, they have Colby Parkinson, Tyler Higbee, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, like so many guys, that could hurt you on any given night. And I think the thing about the Rams is that Matt Stafford kind of picks a receiver a day. You know what I mean? So if Tyler Higbee's catching footballs, he's going to throw him 13. You know what I mean? That's just kind of how their offense runs. So I think consistency across the board from the Eagles here is going to be something that they're going to need in order to get this game done. But I do think that there is going to be a serious running back battle between Kyron Williams and Saquon. And, Saquon will probably break off a really long gain at some point. People will point to that and be like, that could be an X factor, is how well Saquon plays. But he's been so consistent this year that I think you just kind of have to expect him to play well.
Yeah, so let's move into the final game, which is, hands down, the best game of the weekend. Best game of the season, possibly.
Yep.
Ravens-Bills in Buffalo. Personally, I'm so glad this game is in Buffalo. But we have precious few playoff games left in Orchard Park before they build their new stadium. And it's something that we do truly have to cherish, because them and the Commanders have the last 2 old NFL stadiums. And seeing it snowing in Buffalo and all the people are outside and they're miserable, but they're still somehow loving their team. It really just reminds me of growing up watching football. So this game's in Buffalo. Janie, I'm going to kick this one back to you. Who do you think is the X factor in this game, and who do you have coming out on top?
So I kind of pulled what you guys did for some of the prior picks, where my X factor is from the team I don't think is going to win. I think Buffalo's going to take this one in the snow and at Orchard Park. I don't know if it's going to be snowing or not. I haven't looked at the weather, but that Bills team is hot. It's a talented group. But my X factor is Lamar Jackson, and I know it's basic, but his playoff numbers in his career are not very good, and especially in the loss to the Chiefs last year, his passing game, he had a 75.4 passer rating, and he was completing just over 50% of his passes. But especially if Zay Flowers is not going to play, which he's missed practice a couple times this week, if their passing game can go, if they can use the two tight ends of Likely and Andrews and find another receiver who can get some space and get open, I think Lamar can really make a difference in this game. But I still think Buffalo's going to come out on top.
Okay. All right. I like that pick. I don't know who's going to win this game. It really feels like a toss-up to me. And I also think that, like, despite how much everyone calls it a regular season award, which it is in the NFL, the winner of this game is going to win the MVP. I think you have Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, and despite how well they played all regular season, all people are going to be thinking at the time of voting is who wins this game and who performs in this game. The reason that I have the Bills' defensive line as my X factor for this year is because Derrick Henry has been on an absolute tear for the Ravens all season and last weekend against the Steelers, who have, in my opinion, a better D-line than the Bills do, with TJ Watt coming off the edge and some really good players in the front there. Their defense was higher rated all season than the Bills, who rank middle of the pack here. So I think their defensive line is probably going to be the thing that you're going to point to and say they lost the game off of that or they won the game off of that, because containing Derrick Henry is going to be so vital for this Bills team to win this game, especially if the weather conditions prove to be a snow game. Then I actually think the Ravens have the advantage, because I think they have the capability to pound the rock a little bit more than the Bills do.
Yeah, I think that the X factor for me, I mean, obviously you just mentioned it. If the Ravens are going to win this game, they're going to run, and they're just going to run for the entire game. I think they had 280 rushing yards last week, which is just ridiculous.
A lot.
The X factor for me in this one is Josh Allen, I think, which again is pretty chalk. And as you mentioned, this is the MVP battle. But I think that what we've seen from, and obviously Janie mentioned the playoff numbers, but the Ravens kind of kicked ass last week, and they didn't really show any signs of stopping. I think this Ravens offense has been very consistent throughout the year. I think you know exactly what you're going to get. This Bills offense relies entirely on Josh Allen and his decision-making.
Yep.
And I think that if he comes out and doesn't play with his A game, they're going to just fall behind, because that's what you do to this Ravens team. You fall behind. They're going to consistently score all game. But if he comes out and he's doing Josh Allen stuff and he's button mashing, then I think that this is going to be a very close game. And I think the Bills will win if Josh Allen plays well, which is the true meaning of X Factor. But if he doesn't, I think the Ravens crush. So that's kind of my thoughts on that game. That'll wrap up the four.
The 4 games.
The 4 games, and we definitely have a great weekend coming.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, one more thing that I'll add before we move into a little bit of NBA talk here is as much as this Ravens offense has been super consistent, their defense has been consistently poor.
Yeah.
So I think that you can kind of count on this game being a bit of a shootout here between two teams that are supposed to be putting up a lot of points. And I honestly think that favors the Bills more than it does the Ravens.
I would agree.
100%.
So we'll see. I mean, that is definitely the game to watch out of all of them. I think that most of these games are going to go exactly how you expect them to, with the favorites winning. But Bills-Ravens is going to be one that I'm for sure going to be tuning into.
So let's move into the NBA now. Let's transition.
Yep.
I mean, every week we come on here and we talk about how the NBA is in that period where no one cares. And it seems like the Celtics care less and less every game. I think we've dropped 6 of our last 12. And
Yes.
Alex, is it time for panic? Are we hitting the panic button?
I think it's time to have a really serious conversation as to whether this is a championship hangover or whether there is an issue with the roster construction, which is a crazy statement to make, considering the fact that I think that any roster in the NBA would trade to have the Celtics roster. But there is seriously something going wrong right now with the Celtics, whether that's just not showing up in the games that they're supposed to be winning, whether that's the idea that they've won a championship so they don't have to take things seriously until the playoffs. There is something going on with the Celtics right now, and it does not look good. The reason that I kind of have been like holding out on being super panicky about the Celtics is because I'm like, oh my God, like this team is so well constructed. You know what I mean? Like every single piece like fits together in my brain. Like, you know, you have J and J, who are two perennial all-stars in the league. And I'll get to that in a little bit. And then you surround them with defense and shooting. Like there's no reason that this team shouldn't be successful, aside from the fact that they seemingly can't get motivated for games right now. I mean, one of the games that they won in the past 12 games was a 1-point win over the Pelicans, a team that's only won like 7 games this year. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of getting embarrassing right now. They got blown out by the Raptors, you know, which is, you know, a team that's in the Cooper flag battle. You know what I mean? So like you're looking at these games and you're super concerned if you're a Celtics fan like I am. You know what I mean? I mean, we have a little bit of a home stretch coming up here. You're going to play the Magic and the Hawks back to back in TD Garden, but like they don't look like a team that's going to be competing for the 1 seed right now. They're 6 games back of the Cavs, who have continued to be a really, really good team, which I don't think a lot of people were expecting. And they've shown that they can't beat the Thunder in a straight up matchup. So I'm starting to get to the point where I'm concerned a little bit about whether or not this championship hangover is going to carry over into the playoffs, or whether or not the Celtics team is going to go on like a 15-game tear, because that's something that I think they really need.
Yeah, and I think that this team kind of historically does that. They seemingly always come out very flat. I mean, what comes to mind immediately is that 22 season where we went to the finals. Mm-hmm. We were like the 6th seed at the new year, and then we lost like 7 games for the rest of the season after that.
Right.
So I think that once the All-Star break comes around, if you see us drop another couple games, then it becomes a serious conversation as to what is going on. But I think that as long as the Celtics team has the 2 seed, they're in contention for the 1 seed. And I think that I could seriously see them going on a run in the last 30 games of the season where they are just unbeatable. Unbeatable. But it's about time that we start seeing signs of that.
Right.
So, I'm not quite ready to hit the panic button yet, but my hand's kind of hovering over it. Like I'm ready, like instinctually I could just smack it and hit the panic button. Janie, thoughts?
I haven't been as tuned into the Celtics. Jack knows I'm not the biggest basketball fan. There's another Boston sports team that's been pretty my center of attention for 4 or 5 years now, and that's the Boston Bruins, and they've had their own struggles here and there. But my thought with this is, like, you know, when I looked at the Celtics stats and where they stacked up right now, I was a little surprised. And my thought with that is, like you said with the championship hangover thing, it's a real thing, and I'm not, as a casual Celtics fan, I'm not ready to press the panic button as close as, you know, maybe Jack and you are, Alex, as, you know, people who watch the team regularly and are more up to date than I am. But I think back to a couple years ago, another hockey reference, but when the Tampa Bay Lightning won the Stanley Cup in 2020, they came out in 2021 super flat, and they ended up I think they finished second in their division, kind of just coasted in the playoffs, and then like that, turned it on in the postseason and ended up winning back-to-back Stanley Cups. And it's early enough in the year, especially across a 80-plus game season, where, you know, you can hit these stretches and still find a way to bounce back. And I think the Celtics team is certainly talented enough. I think they just got to get a little bit more momentum going, and they'll be good, especially heading into an All-Star break where some of the guys can get needed rest, get healthy, and get back to playing winning basketball.
And I think that it comes down to, I mean, we have the 3rd best record in the NBA. It's not like we're fighting for a playoff spot.
Right.
But championships are won by beating the teams that you're supposed to beat, not just the big games. And I think that that's something that this Celtics team struggles with, getting up for games that don't necessarily matter in terms of playoff standings. So I think that retaining this 2 seed, not giving it up to the Knicks at all this season, is something that must happen. And when that happens is when I will hit the panic button. But until then, I think that we are okay.
Okay. And I had something else to say. My final thought here. Let it come to me, let it come to me, let it come to me. Oh, got it. All right. So we are at, in my opinion, the bottom of the Jaylen Brown cycle right now. I don't know if any of
Yeah.
you are like
Yeah, no, you're so
consistent
right.
NBA Twitter guys, but I am. So like what happens is every single year with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, they win a lot of games and then something happens and everybody's like, oh my goodness, Jaylen Brown is better than Jason Tatum. And then he plays like shit. And then everybody's like, oh my God, this guy's not even an all-star. How are we paying him $50 million? And then he plays really well in the playoffs. And they're like, oh my God, he's better than Jason Tatum. We're at the bottom right now. We're at the low point of the Jaylen Brown cycle. So I don't really necessarily think that's going to continue for very much longer. And as much as that take is insufferable, it happens every year. So I'm not really sure why I'm super surprised by it. But I would love to see the Celtics rattle off some wins and do it quickly. A team that I do think needs to press the panic button and like right now is the Phoenix Suns. They have looked really out of sorts this year. They're sitting at the 11 seed in the NBA right now at 19-20, and a team that has 3 max players in KD, Brad Beal, and Devin Booker has been just all out of sorts. I want to ask you, Jack, do you think that this is a team that's going to be blowing things up really shortly? And what do you think a return is going to look like for any one of these players? Because they have absolutely no draft capital going into this, the next couple of years here.
I think that's the main question, right? Because I don't think the question is whether or not this Suns team is good enough to win a championship. It's clear that they're not.
Yeah.
They're not. And so I think that the experiment has failed rather miserably, and I think that they're ready to move on. But the question is, what do you get for them? And I think that right now we could be looking down the barrel of a Jimmy Butler move, which wouldn't make any sense to me, right? And I don't want to talk about all that again. We've already spent enough time on that.
Yep.
But besides him, there's no real move to be made. I mean, what team is going to give up a massive package for Kevin Durant? Because he is worth no less than players and at least 4 first-round picks in this current market. A guy like Devin Booker is someone that you have to keep around. You cannot get rid of him. And then Brad Beal, what do you do with this team? They're just not good, and no one is going to trade for them because their values are all too high.
KD is 36. Like, how many more years of genuinely good basketball do you think he has in him? And I get that maybe
3?
If you're lucky, right?
He's still scoring over 20 points a game. He doesn't show any signs of stopping that.
But he has to go to a contender is what I'm saying. You can't just ship him off.
But no contenders have the package besides like
or the money to pay for him.
So
you can't keep him.
I mean, they're in this position where they're trapped with this team and they're not good. So, I mean, are you just going to bite the bullet and be horrible? Or are you going to try and make something work and get rid of these guys at a completely bargain price?
Yeah, I think they're going about it all the wrong way, too. I mean, they just traded Josh Okogie, one of their promising young wings, for like Nick Richards and a bag of chips from the Hornets.
He's one of the better guys in his role in the NBA.
I agree. So, like, I don't really know what their move is. Honestly, I think you have to ride it out with this roster. And you have to try and get anything you can for Bradley Beal. And if you can get Jimmy Butler, I think you pull the trigger because at most he's going to be there for half a season, and then you can assess whether or not you need to re-sign him.
And then you also have a ton of money if he does walk to maybe fill out your roster.
Right. Or to start to distribute players other places and then rebuild.
Because in my opinion, they have good pieces, just not a good core. Like I think that most teams would make a move for Tyus Jones right now. I think that every team in the NBA would make a move for Grayson Allen.
I think every team in the NBA would make a move for Devin Booker.
Agreed. And those are 3 guys that are still pretty young in terms of NBA lifetime. So those are seemingly, to me, the guys that you have to keep around and do whatever you can to keep around. But if you're going to get rid of a guy like Bradley Beal, it may be their ticket out of having to deal with this big 3. If they get rid of Beal, they have Jimmy Butler for half a season, and then he walks. And then they have $50 million in cash that they can continue to round out their offense with, or their entire roster with, which may be the optimal scenario. But what is Bradley Beal's incentive to go along with that? Is he going to do them a favor? They haven't done him any, certainly.
Right. Yeah, it's a really strange situation going on in Phoenix right now. And it's one that they set up completely on their own. I think everybody when Bradley Beal signed there was like, this is way too much money. This is a bad deal. And we see what you're trying to do, but we understand that bench depth is so important in the NBA. Like, you can't just throw 3 stars out there with no one behind them and expect to win games. And that's what the Suns did. And everybody was like, don't do that. And then they're like shocked when it didn't work.
Well, and Yusuf Nurkic has been very bad.
Yes. He's been very disappointing for them, and I don't think that Ayton in that scenario would have done better.
Correct.
To be honest with you, keeping Ayton probably wouldn't have helped you. But
another
overall,
guy who's been bad. He's been bad with the Trailblazers.
Yes, overall, I think that this is a team that is in a really interesting spot right now because they need to do something, and it needs to involve them getting some draft capital. Because in the next 5 years, whether or not this team isn't going to win a championship in 5 years. It's just not. There isn't a scenario where I see the Phoenix Suns competing or winning a championship in the next 5 years.
5 years is a lot of time. I think that 5 years is long enough where they can maybe, if they move off this in like the next 2, that gives them 3 years to get back. I think that in 5 years,
you have no draft picks. You have none.
Not right now.
You have no picks.
Right.
So I mean, I think like they're in a spot where they need to start moving players, and I really do think that the only one that has some serious value is Devin Booker, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see him off the roster by the trade deadline, despite the fact that is the guy that you should be building around.
Yeah,
I agree. I'd like to add on that I just looked up some contract stuff because I knew Bradley Beal was there. I didn't know he was making $50 million at 31 years of age.
Seriously.
Averaging 17.5, and his contract's going to go up by $3 million next year, and then the year after it's another 3. Who's going to want to spend draft capital and free up space for a guy with declining numbers whose contract's only rising?
Yeah,
that just doesn't seem like it's a possibility.
It makes no sense.
And he has a no trade clause, so
and
he doesn't have to leave at all.
That's even worse.
Yeah,
he doesn't have to
he's on the roster. I mean, Brad Beal is someone that you can't get anything for. You would be taking a loss. But getting his contract off of your books would be, fantastic is kind of the way that I would think about it if I was there.
Another team that's in a similar position to me right now is the Golden State Warriors. They are a half game above the Suns. And at this point, it seems clear that their roster construction is not good enough to go to the championship to make a serious run, which I know we've said before, but this time it seems more definitive. And what is the purpose to them winning basketball games? They will win one night and then they'll lose by 50 the next. And then I'm sat here wondering why they are still trying in such a loaded conference.
And keep Steph happy. You don't want to get rid of him.
I mean
that's the only answer.
I understand
and he
that.
hasn't even played super well, Steph. I don't think he's borderline. I don't think he's an all-star starter this year. He's obviously an all-star. But if you're not winning games, there's no reason for him to be there. Simple as that.
Yeah. So, I mean, would you rather float around in mediocrity and keep him around than have a direction? Because they are a directionless team right now.
Yeah. I think that you'll see them in trade rumors that they probably won't go for a little while. And then in the offseason, you'll probably trade Kuminga for something of value. But, to me, I'm like, what would the Warriors have done differently? You signed Klay Thompson, who's clearly not the same player,
right?
What was the goal? I think you knew exactly what was going to happen when they ran the table back with the exact same team that they had when they were in the play-in last year. So I'm not overly surprised that we see the Warriors back where they're struggling.
Yeah,
mediocrity is a hard thing in sports, especially in a league like the NBA that has this play-in game that the NHL does not have. And when you're like a 10 seed, it really is the in-between spot of do you go for it or do you retool and do you rebuild? And I think eventually they might have to bite the bullet and move on from what was successful years ago.
Yep.
And whether it's move Curry, which is would be ridiculous to me. It's the fact that it's an older core with guys that just aren't performing. And it's a weird thing you're probably not going to get youth for a guy like, I don't even know if they'd move like a Wiggins or what's Draymond's value at this point? Like,
Yeah,
Nothing.
nothing.
these guys are over the hill, and I mean, Wiggins is still young enough, but a guy like Draymond is not doing much for that team anymore, and you're paying him $25 million a year to have four. He's averaging 8.7, which is his career, and I don't know what you do from here if you're a team like that, just mired in mediocrity with aging players, and you kind of have to go for the retool.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I think that, Jack and I talk about it every year. You would rather be a team that's in the rebuild battle than a team that's middling. Like, directionless teams, despite the fact that tanking teams are not fun to watch, directionless teams are the teams that, get sold and get moved. And I think that the Warriors are starting to kind of trend in that direction, despite the fact that they've had so much success over the past few years.
Yeah. So, Janie, we've had you on this show. We've been talking for an hour now. And at heart, you're a hockey guy.
Yep.
And that's something that I know. Obviously, you have the jersey on. We're going to kind of give you the floor here for the last segment to just kind of talk about the NHL right now, and more importantly, the Bruins. And Alex and I are both casual fans in the purest form of the definition. We don't
Super
watch
casual.
until playoffs. But
hey, you watched with me on
I did.
Tuesday night.
When you have the game on, I'll sit down for a little bit, but I'm not really paying that much attention.
Yeah.
Right now, the Bruins are sitting in 4th in the Atlantic, and they're 7th in the Eastern Conference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that right now, the Western Conference is, loaded. They have powerhouse teams top to bottom.
Well, I have a question before you get into whatever you want to, talk about, but you can go on, Jack.
So I was just going to ask you, with the NHL trade deadline in sight, right around the corner.
Yep.
What do the Bruins have to do in order to kind of get out of this funk that they've been in? And what moves do they have to make to get themselves back in that conversation of championship level teams? And do they have to?
So it's great timing with this, because the Bruins hosted an event last night, and team president Cam Neely was asked about what he thinks of this team. And he said he's planning for two directions: a retool or a buy. And that ultimately falls on the players performing. And it's a common thing in sports that, guys will be hot for a little and cool down again. And you've seen it with the Bruins that after they fired Montgomery at the end of November, they got that bump under Sacco. They win 4 straight, granted against 4 teams not particularly in playoff contention. They go out west. They get blown out 8-1 in Winnipeg. They lose 5-1 in Seattle the next night. And then they rally off 2 wins against Vancouver and Calgary before ending the trip in an overtime loss to the Edmonton Oilers, the reigning Western Conference champions. And as it's gone on, I've more and more accepted the fact that this team isn't built for a championship. And it sucks to say, because it's obviously you want your team to win every year. And it's hard to come to that reality where it's like, maybe they just don't have it. And I think losing 6 straight to start the calendar year of 2025 was a death sentence. And at that point, at least. And when the deadline comes around, the Bruins don't have many guys that you can move and expect a good return out of, because the guys on contracts with 1 or 2 years left are the guys that would get moved. And Brad Marchand has 1 year left on his contract, and I don't see him going anywhere. And I know he's been in some talks about stuff, and that would kill off everything. And there's a guy like Trent Frederick who's underperforming this year, but the last 2 years he's had 17 and 18 goals playing third line minutes, and he just hasn't been as good as he can be, as good as he's shown. And he's in the last year of a $2.2 million deal. And is that a guy that they want to keep around for next year? I would think so. I think you've seen what he can do, and he's got that physicality aspect to his game, the hard-nosed kind of style with some scoring aspects that the Bruins' identity is based upon. Mm-hmm. And to really answer your question, Jack, I think this next stretch of games will determine that. Reinforcements aren't really going to come from within. There's 3 prospects currently playing for the Providence Bruins that could be up and have been up, and that's Matt Patra, who's currently up with the team and had an assist on Tuesday night after spending a lot of time down in Providence. Georgi Merkulov, who has played about 12 games in the NHL and hasn't really gotten a fair shot, in my opinion, and Fabian Lysell, their first-round pick from 2021, who's played one game, made an impact, and got sent back down. And I think this stretch of games before the NHL's the Four Nations face-off that begins the second week of February. It's basically a 2-week break for the guys not playing in it. I think that's going to be very telling how they play from today to that break and how they come out of the break. And I'm not sure if buying is the best option. I think a retool could work, but then again, what pieces could they really retool at this point?
So we're kind of in a state of just waiting and seeing. And if they show signs of having a direction in the next 3 weeks, then they become buyers at the deadline. But if not, then they throw in the towel on the season, you say.
I don't think a full-in buy is a great idea. What they did in 2023 with acquiring Dmitry Orlov and Garnett Hathaway from Washington, and then for a first plus, and then acquiring Tyler Bertuzzi for a first, that you won't see that this year.
Okay. All right. Here's my question for you, just from an outsider perspective. Obviously, you talk about the Bruins, kind of been perennial disappointments for the past couple of years. Lose to the Blues. I don't remember what year that was in the Stanley Cup, 2019, and then you have the most successful season in NHL history, scoring 140 points, and then you lose in the first round of the playoffs. Obviously, the Bruins fired head coach Claude Julien and then hired Bruce Cassidy right after that. And then you fire Bruce Cassidy and he wins a Stanley Cup in Vegas. And then a year later, after Jim Montgomery brings you to the most successful regular season in NHL history, you fire him. So I'm wondering is it fair that the Bruins front office has kind of offloaded these coaches who have seemingly had some type of success, either with the Bruins or in post? And whether or not, you think that has kind of, were those firings, warranted, or, is it more of a GM issue? Because I really don't see them bringing in a better coach than the two that they've already had on the roster.
And I would also add on to that question, do you think that the shuffle of the head coach, the constant shuffle of the head coach, has had a direct impact on the team and not being able to build around a game plan?
Right. Shift blame. Yeah.
Well, that's a nice way to wrap up the episode. We don't really do any hockey, and it certainly is interesting to hear from like a really diehard fan perspective the situation that's going on in Boston, which is something that we are not qualified to talk about. So, Ryan, thank you for coming on. It's been a real pleasure. And as always, this has been the Corner Office, and I'm Jack Byrne.
I'm Alex Benders.
Go on 3. Hey.